just even at the very inception level, right? Lots of great ideas, right? But when you sort of dig into those ideas further, what you find is that it's hard to build a company out of that. The issue becomes scalability, right? How do you scale that business?
Mr. Haque, thank you very much for joining us. So tell us broadly what's happening in the Valley nowadays as we head into the end of 2014.
Well, in terms of the kinds of companies we're looking at and companies that are surfacing, well, there's a lot of different trends. But one of the trends that we're seeing on the enterprise infrastructure side is this whole concept of big data, right? And big data and analytics. And I think what's really driving that to a very large extent is the utility that people are finding out is available to companies to affect their top line. If you go back 15 years or so, a lot of stuff that's happened in the enterprise space had to do with the ERP systems and driving productivity in the enterprise in different forms and shapes, so that you brought the operational expenses under control, increased productivity at every level, right? Whether it's Salesforce, helping productivity of Salesforce, whether it's ERP systems helping with supply chain and everything else. So lots of stuff happened over the last 15 years in those areas. Now what you're starting to see is, with the advent of big data and big data analysis and so on, how do you affect the top line, right? The revenue line, right? How can you do better advertising, right? If you're an ad tech company, how can you do better product differentiation? How can you look at all the data that's available out there, right? Whether it's data from Twitter, or whether it's data from blogs that are out there, the unstructured data, right? And how can you take all that data and be able to understand what is going on in the marketplace, right? Be able to understand sentiments that exist regarding your product or your offering or whatever among consumers.
Right. So in some ways you're also saying that growth is not going to come in the traditional way.
That's one way to say that, or what you could say is that growth is now, people have discovered that there are very intelligent ways of driving growth, right? Not just throwing people at the at the Salesforce level, but how do you sort of really take a look at all the data that's available, right? And be able to do precision targeting and a whole host of other kinds of things, so that you drive your top line, right? You increase your revenues, you increase the productivity of your sales force, more so than you could do with something like a Salesforce.com and CRM systems and so on and so forth.
What's a good illustration of what you're talking about from the world that you're looking at?
In terms of companies and so on? Well, there's a whole bunch of companies that, some of them are still early on, but Mu Sigma based here is an example. We have an investment in a company called Manthan Systems, actually here in India, right, which is driving retail analytics, right? We have a company called Capillary, which is sort of again doing analytics, involved with patient engagement, right, or partner engagement or customer engagement, right? So I think those are examples of companies, at least here in India. There's similar companies in the U.S., right, where we've got an investment in a company called 1010 Data, right? We have an investment in a company called Apogee, which has got an insight products suite, which really helps retailers and insurance carriers and providers and all to do a much better job at productivity.
Right. So you were saying that, when people come to you, or some people come to you, or some ideas come to you, they're really features and not enterprises or companies, which is what you would want. Similarly, what are the other mistakes perhaps entrepreneurs, even though maybe they've already reached some level of maturity, making, which you want to, in a way showcase and talk about?
Well, so I think there's a couple of things there. So one is, just even at the very inception level, right? Lots of great ideas, right? But when you sort of dig into those ideas further, what you find is that it's hard to build a company out of that. It might be a very interesting enhancement to an existing product. That's what I mean by a feature, right? It's a feature not a company, right? So that's one thing, right? But then what happens is, let's say that someone has really come up with a very intelligent idea, and it is very uniquely differentiated. It is solving a real problem that exists out there in the marketplace, and so they've been able to build a company, and the company has, let's say, reached $7, $8, $10 million in revenue. Now the issue becomes scalability, right? How do you scale that business, right? How can you better understand the marketplace that you're going after, or the market that you're going after, the vertical that you're going after? Is it a solution that goes across multiple verticals, or is it a single vertical? Whatever it is, how can you better scale your business, right? How can you better reach customers, right? How many customers there are that you should go out? What are some of the unique requirements for each of them? Do you sell it as a service? Do you have to do a lot of professional services involved with it? Do you sell it as a managed service? Do you offer that in the cloud, or is it an on-premise solution, right? So a variety of different things. There's lots of decisions to be made, and that requires, obviously entrepreneurs having the right kind of background, having people in their company that they've attracted that have the right background to be able to answer all those kinds of questions and do all that analysis so that the company can scale.
Right. So two areas. So mobile apps and shared economy startups. I mean, are you seeing more steam in both these areas?
Yes, I think we're starting to see a whole bunch of apps, newer and newer apps coming up, newer and newer solutions coming up.
So there's still legs in that whole movement.
That's I think so. Yes. There's a lot of, and some of them require. They might not just be software apps. They might be apps that are utilizing a sensor, right? And so, there's a lot of fitness devices now coming up, right? There's this whole IoT movement, Internet of Things movements, right? Where there's sensors in different places that are now gathering data and then allow for certain decisions to be made and alerts to be sent out and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Right. So if I were to ask you about a couple of areas that are exciting you most, so you talked about big data analytics, and would this be the next one, the whole IoT
Yeah,
area?
I think that's a very interesting space because it's in some ways it's an extension, right, of what's happening with data analytics, right? And the whole idea is, when you think about it, these are new sources of revenues, right? These are new apps. These are going to change outcomes, right? Whether it's patient health, just by patient by himself, or whether these are things that are being used in hospitals, for example, right? Where you can extend, you can reduce patient cost or extend the life of a patient by being able to diagnose things and provide better treatment and so on and so forth. They could also be in the energy domain, right? I mean, smarter homes, right? How is there a way to use sensors, right, to be able to do a better utilization of energy, right? A more cost-effective and efficient use of energy, right? Less wastage. So there's all kinds of different applications that I think will emerge, but it's all based on different kinds of apps and sensors working together, to make a more effective solution in place.
Right. Let me ask you about three enterprises or industries or verticals which you did not invest in, and in some ways you regret, and why?
That we did not invest in.
Which you feel you missed, I mean, for whatever reason. I mean, you could have invested in it, or it could be a sector or a company, and when you look back, you say, okay, maybe I should have.
Well, so I think, we're a pretty, we're a very diversified firm. So, as you know, we have investments here in India, we have investments in Israel, we have some investments in China, we have a lot of investments in the US. We work across multiple sectors, right? So, we have, for example, an enterprise and software infrastructure team. We have what we call an e-commerce consumer internet team here as well as in the US, right? We have a medical team, right? And so, we do investments in the medical device space. We do some pharma stuff. We've done a lot of wellness, fitness stuff, and we're doing a lot of stuff in the healthcare IT space. So we're pretty diversified. We're covering a lot of sectors. In fact, one area that we are actually happy that we did not cover was the whole clean tech space, right? It's nothing against clean tech, but when you look at the whole clean tech space, to a very large extent, it does not lend itself that easily to a venture investment, right? Because the cost structure and the amount of investment that's required and the manufacturing facilities that have to be put into place and so on and so forth to make clean tech successful. It's very costly, very, very
There is the role of
capital-intensive.
subsidies also in the picture.
Exactly, and therefore, it just requires a very different investment vehicle than a typical venture capital investment vehicle.
Right. So if you were a young man in Delhi today wanting to start up as you were many years ago, what would you be advising them at this, given where India is today and given the aspirations?
Well, I think I think the best days for India lie ahead. I think there will be a tremendous growth in the use of technology in India in the future. We're seeing that in China as well, right? Obviously, we've seen that in the U.S., and we just think that even the market in the U.S. is continuing to expand. The use of technology is just continuing to grow rapidly. The same thing is going to happen in China, and it is happening in India as well. And so I think the best days are still ahead. Lots of new companies are going to get created. If you look at India to a very large extent, if you look back, let's say 10, 15 years, to a very large extent, at least the tech sector has been driven by two things, right? One was services, computer services being provided, technology services being provided, with customers being in the US, for example, in Europe and so on, some here obviously, and then product design being done, large establishments like IBM and VMware and Microsoft having facilities here, products being developed, but being developed for US companies, right? And first for US customers and then over a period of time, spreading out. I think you're starting to see now product companies getting created in India, serving both the local customers, but also customers outside India. So you're starting to see, more than just services and product development for other companies being done in India. You're starting to see products that are being built for local consumers and local enterprises. And I think that will continue to grow because, I think the use of technology in Indian enterprises will continue to grow.
That's a good note to end on. Thank you very much, Mr. Haque.
Good. All right.